If you've played Mass Effect Andromeda, then you know that the end of the game leaves a lot of unresolved plot threads, with the biggest question being, what happened to the Quarian arc? You've probably also heard about the cancelled DLC that was supposed to resolve this story. So what happened to that Quarian arc DLC? Well, it never actually existed. Let me explain. Mass Effect Andromeda released in March of 2017, and a few months later, on June 28th, a Facebook post from Sinclair Networks, a video game studio from Austria, started circulating. This company claimed that after meeting with BioWare that there would be no future story DLCs for Andromeda. Sinclair Networks went on to claim that their contract was for 3 DLC packs planned for August of 2017. They also claimed that their boss was the one who wanted the DLCs to happen, and that it was BioWare who didn't. They doubled down in their replies, placing blame on BioWare for not announcing DLC. And some people thought this was a frustrated third-party company who had been jilted by BioWare, and with the recent restructuring with BioWare Montreal, it gave fans more reason to believe the rumor, but some fans weren't buying it. Regardless, this leak was picked up by major gaming news networks and YouTubers, and the information spread like wildfire. Luckily, there were some fans on the BioWare social network and Reddit who jumped to investigate. There were also BioWare devs who came forward to say that they had no idea who Sinclair Networks even was. As it turns out, Sinclair Networks wasn't real. Sinclair Networks never existed and never worked on any DLC because they were just a bunch of internet trolls trying to get attention, and this actually wasn't their first hoax. Leading up to this, the day before Andromeda released, Sinclair Networks posted on their Facebook page that they had begun working on improving bugs and issues with Andromeda, clearly setting up for further leaks. I have to give them credit for their trolling because it was pretty elaborate and people definitely fell for it. IMDb even had Sinclair Networks credited on several AAA titles, which IMDb ended up removing after this incident. Eurogamer spoke with someone apparently connected to the group of trolls, and they said that Sinclair Networks started with good intentions, as an online support where they help people via Facebook. This person said that the Facebook page also posted several patch notes for games like The Division to gain attention. Soon their ambitions grew, and that led to them pretending to be a real company working on real games. After BioWare fans started digging, they uncovered all of this information, and Sinclair Networks and the people affiliated with them deleted their profiles and haven't been heard from since. So if you've been in the Mass Effect community long enough, you've probably heard about cancelled Andromeda DLCs. Well, this is where that came from. So the question is, did the Quarian Arc DLC ever actually exist? Well, yes and no. It didn't officially exist, but if you've played Andromeda, it definitely seems like it was planned during Andromeda's development to be a story explored in the future. The entire game sets it up and you're left with that major cliffhanger, and it would also have made the perfect DLC content. But there were no official announcements for any future Andromeda DLC, which was odd because BioWare has always released DLC with their major titles. Here is a timeline of all of the DLC releases for BioWare's major titles. You can see that all of their games have had story DLC, usually within the first 6 months of release. Andromeda is the only outlier. In August of 2017, just 5 months after Andromeda's release, BioWare announced on their blog that there are no planned future patches for single-player or in-game story content. This was just 1 month after Casey Hudson rejoined BioWare as their new general manager, after leaving back in 2014. But at this point, fans know that there is no future in-game content intended to be released. But the blog post did say that the game was designed to expand on the Pathfinder's journey via their online Apex multiplayer missions, and that even though in-game story content was dead, BioWare still had plans to tell stories in the Andromeda Galaxy via comics and novels, and they specifically mentioned the fate of the Quarian Arc. This blog post was just 1 month after Casey Hudson had returned to the studio. What is also interesting about this is that the author, Catherine Valente, said that Annihilation had been in the works for 18 months. And 18 months prior to October of 2017 would mean that Annihilation began production back in April of 2016. This means that the Quarian Arc novel started production a year before Andromeda was even released. The author also said that Annihilation was always planned, and if this is true, then it seems like BioWare had either set up this book to connect to a future Quarian Arc DLC, or had begun to relegate the DLC possibilities to extended media. Annihilation does not resolve the Quarian arc storyline, so it could have gone either way. But at this point, it seems like BioWare doesn't know what the future Andromeda was even intended to be, and this lines up with something that Mac Walters said. In an IGN interview that was released 3 months before Andromeda's release, Walters says that they plan for Andromeda to continue, but not in a trilogy. He then also says that they are already planning on how those will be dealt with in future installments. And I'm going to assume he's talking about the Quarian arc storyline here, since it was one of the major cliffhangers. I find it weird that BioWare would mix up their standard DLC formula this way, but it does line up with what Catherine said. Catherine also replied to a few fans about the book's delay, which was delayed for about a year. Obviously, she can't give any information as to why, but looking back on this after seeing Mass Effect 5's announcement, I do have to wonder if this delay is because the Quarian arc could be involved with the next game, especially with the line referring to Arc 6. Returning to the Casey Hudson timeline here is important because in April of 2018, BioWare released a blog where Hudson talks about the future of BioWare. What makes this blog post so interesting is that Casey acknowledges that there was fan excitement for a future Quarian arc DLC, and his wording makes it seem like it would have been possible, and that they wanted to actually make it, had it not been shelved for Anthem. We know that Casey was not involved in the later development of Andromeda, which according to reports was when the story and vision finally came together. So it seems like when he became GM of BioWare in July of 2017, they had considered an in-game Quarian arc DLC, but ultimately decided against it. And the book Annihilation does continue the Quarian arc storyline, but it actually kind of leaves it on another cliffhanger which could have been picked up in an in-game DLC to finally bring the Quarians to the Nexus. At the end of the blog, Hudson says that the Quarian arc DLC was something they knew they had to resolve in future games. And if we look at the timeline, BioWare released the first teaser trailer back in December of 2020, and the book, while intended for a 2017 release, ended up releasing in November of 2018. And even though Catherine tweeted that the premise of Annihilation has been the same premise of the book since day one, I do have to wonder if there is a connection. With the first teaser releasing in 2020, it makes sense that prior to this, the Mass Effect team was working hard to plan the next sequel. And this is just me wondering what the timeline looks like between Mass Effect Andromeda's release and how long after did it take BioWare to decide to move forward with Mass Effect 5. There's an interesting tweet from Casey Hudson from back in 2019, where he says there's a lot of ideas that they want to do with Mass Effect. He tweeted this about a year prior to the teaser trailer release in December of 2020, so I have to wonder if they were in the planning stages here. This would have been 2 years after Andromeda's release and 1 year after Annihilation's release. So there's not any overlap that we see on our end, but I would love to know what BioWare was planning. Anyways, back to the DLC. Now, it's no secret that Andromeda suffered through a rough development, but I don't want to get into that. I want to focus on the reception of the game at its launch and how that may have led to any future DLCs to be shelved. When Andromeda released in 2017, its bugs and animation issues brought it a lot of deserving criticism, but it also brought it a lot of unwanted and exaggerated hate. Was it deserving of criticism? Absolutely. The facial animations and bugs, which were patched shortly after release, were definitely an issue. But even with these issues, Andromeda's reception from critics and the general player base was not as bad as people make it out to be. Most reviews gave Andromeda around a 7, 7.5, which yes, that's low for a Mass Effect game, but how do you even follow in the footsteps of Shepard and the original trilogy? That's a very tall order, but regardless, a 7 isn't bad in the gaming world. A 7 is a good game. Amazon reviews, Steam reviews, Google reviews all show players generally liking the game. No, it's not the original trilogy, and Ryder isn't Shepard, and Andromeda not being either of those absolutely factored into fans not enjoying the game, but Andromeda has some really great stuff under all the harsh criticisms and my face is tired memes, and I don't think it deserves the hatred that it was given. YouTubers turned the game into a meme at a time when EA was already being scrutinized by gamers, and Andromeda releasing with issues was only fuel to that fire. Part of this was genuine criticism about the game's story and characters, but a lot of this was also clickbait and the internet doing what it loves to do: hate stuff. You can still find people in the fandom who know the memes but have never even played the games and still hate it, despite never even giving it a chance. Andromeda was not the worst game ever that some people made it out to be. And it's unfortunate that the reception was so over-dramatized that it led to BioWare taking a step back from the franchise. But it seems like Andromeda not getting DLCs was more than just reception to the game, but a mixture of development issues, public reception, and seemingly BioWare not knowing exactly where they wanted to take Andromeda to begin with. So, to sum it up, an official Quarian Arc DLC was never announced, and the rumor of multiple DLCs being cancelled was from a fake Facebook post. Annihilation was already planned prior to Andromeda's release, but this doesn't resolve the storyline, and when Casey Hudson rejoined BioWare, a Quarian Arc DLC sounded like a possibility, but was never actually announced and was ultimately shelved for Anthem. It's unfortunate that we didn't get an in-game DLC for the Quarian Arc, and we'll probably never really know what happened behind the scenes, but I'm interested to see what BioWare eventually does come up with, especially with how different the studio is now. The reception to Andromeda was complicated and was definitely not what BioWare was hoping for, and we know that after its release it became a defining moment for the studio. At this point, it's been 6 years since Andromeda's release and BioWare is in a very different state now. We're seeing them be very transparent about where their games are development-wise, and their blog posts and meet the dev interviews, and we're also seeing a lot of change within the company. They are moving away from crunch and are allowing longer development, which we're seeing with Dragon Age Dreadwolf, and we also know that a lot of Mass Effect veterans have come back to work on Mass Effect 5, and they've also added some really exciting names to their roster. Gary McKay, BioWare's general manager, also shared in a blog post from this year that the next Mass Effect game will be a single-player game. So I'm excited to see them be able to embrace what BioWare is best at, single-player RPGs. All of these have me very excited for the future of Mass Effect. I think Andromeda will somehow be involved with Mass Effect 5. It may not have a huge involvement, but BioWare is sitting on a lot of unresolved stories, and I think, like Mike Gamble has teased, we'll see Andromeda again and we'll eventually find out what happened to that Quarian Arc. If you're interested in seeing what Mass Effect Andromeda connections have been teased so far, you can check out my video where I break down everything we've been shown and how it connects to Andromeda. And thank you to this commenter on my Andromeda video who made me do some investigative work because I had never heard of the Facebook hoax. So what do you think? Do you think Andromeda needs a direct sequel? Do you think it needs DLC? Do you think it needs closure, or do you think it should be involved in the next game? And if you're interested in more Mass Effect content, make sure to like my video and subscribe to my channel. I've got a lot of videos in the works and already have some that you can check out below. Thank you for watching.
This is Commander Shepard, signing off.